Welcome to the Ideal Leaders Self-Learning Series on the co-creation of virtual learning accessibility. This video is about demystifying misconceptions about disability and accessibility practices related to virtual teaching and learning. Misconception 1. All disabilities are visible. Indeed, not all disabilities are visible. When talking about disabilities, very often we may think of the following groups of individuals with some visible conditions, such as people with mobility disability, who are wheelchair users, or people with visual impairment, who use a white cane or has a guide dog. However, people having these disabilities do not necessarily have any visible conditions. Actually, not all people with mobility disability use wheelchairs, canes, or other assistive devices. Not all people with visual impairment use white cane or has a guide dog. Moreover, some disabilities might not be immediately visible, such as speech, reading, and learning disabilities. And some people may have multiple disabilities, which might be partly visible and invisible. Misconception 2. Disabilities simply refer to personal medical conditions. It is important to note that disability does not simply refer to personal medical conditions. According to the World Health Organization, disability refers to the interaction between individuals with a health condition and personal and environmental factors, such as negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation and public buildings, and limited social supports. Disability experiences happen when environmental conditions do not support an individual's characteristics and needs. The context matters. There are many reasons why people may be experiencing varying situations and degrees of disabilities. For example, some may have disabilities from birth, different health conditions, diseases, or experience accidents, or they may develop disabilities with age. Some people may have combinations of different kinds of disability experiences. Some people may be experiencing progressive or recurring disability experiences differently at different times. For example, some may need particular accessibility features on one day and others or none on another day, depending on their condition. Some people may be experiencing temporary disability conditions or constraints due to their surrounding or due to other situational aspects. Some people may have any other experiences or factors not listed here. Here are some examples that some students may have temporary disabilities. The first scenario: the eyeglasses of a student was broken, and it takes a few days to receive the new pair of eyeglasses. Without the eyeglasses, the student struggles to read the text on the computer screen as usual. The second scenario: students who call into the online class may experience the class much like an individual who is blind and unable to see a shared screen, or fellow students on screen. The third scenario: the speaker and volume control of the notebook, computer, and earphone are not functional. The student attending an online class may experience the class much like a deaf or hard of hearing individual. Another scenario: a student is attending online lecture at home. At the same time, there is renovation work at the neighbor's home. The student struggles to listen to what the course instructor is speaking due to the loud noise from the renovation work. The student may be experiencing situational limitation under this context. The last scenario: not every student participates in class with a fast internet connection, large display monitor, and modern computer. We need to recognize that students may be using a variety of devices to participate, which may include phones, tablets, older technology, along with unstable internet access. Misconception 3. Students with the same types of disabilities require the same set of accessibility support. The answer is no, not really. The fact is, students with the same types of disabilities do not necessarily require the same set of accessibility support. Every individual is unique. Students having the same types of disabilities may share some similar needs, but they do not necessarily share exactly the same set of learning needs or accessibility support. A wide range of factors jointly determine the learning needs, barriers, and required accessibility support. The factors would impact how they access digital materials and virtual learning environment. Examples of these factors include individual characteristics and preferences, program requirements, the accessibility of teaching and learning materials and environments, and the availability of certain tools, hardware, and software. Sometimes, hardware and software with specific accessibility features including web browsers, media players, or assistive technologies, may not be available to an individual. For example, tools may not be affordable, not installed, or not compatible with the computer, not available in some languages, or not available for other reasons. In other cases, people are unaware of accessibility solutions, or how to configure and use them. It is important to recognize, appreciate, and consider the broad diversity of accessibility needs and learning needs of students. It is also important to talk to students with disabilities, to understand their needs, and explore the required accessibility support together. Do not determine or categorize their needs and required accessibility support solely based on their disability types or any medical diagnosis. Misconception 4. We need to address accessibility issues only when students request accessibility arrangements. The answer is definitely not. We should always proactively consider accessibility from the beginning and throughout the entire process of designing and delivering educational materials and activities, rather than being an afterthought, regardless of whether any students approach you with a request for accessibility arrangements. There are many reasons for always proactively considering accessibility when designing and delivering educational materials and activities, due to some potential barriers such as stigma, complicated procedures, or the lack of awareness of available support. It is possible that some students who encounter barriers in accessing the teaching and learning materials and activities may not want to voice out the problems. Some students with disabilities may not want to self-identify their needs or register with the university's student record. It is also possible that instructors may not be aware of some students with invisible disabilities or other accessibility needs in the class. For example, some students might need to take breaks at set times for insulin injections, so they may need certain adjustment of the exam period. As time goes by, if the inaccessible materials and activities are re-delivered every semester, the number of students who encounter barriers and cannot access those materials and activities may accumulate. It would seriously hamper the effectiveness of teaching and learning in the long run. Besides online classes, it is equally important to always consider accessibility throughout the processes of organizing academic events, such as seminars, conferences, workshops, that also welcome non-university members as participants. There are some potential situations that would be highly relevant to accessibility consideration. For example, organizing team did not invite participants to notify their accessibility arrangements requests upon registration. Organizing team and/or speakers might or might not know the accessibility needs of some participants ahead of time. New participants join the event at the last minute. Some participants develop accessibility needs just before the events. Some participants encounter barriers and request accessibility arrangements during the events. These situations suggest that we should do our best to make the events and presentations accessible from the beginning to better prepare for different situations. It can make the sessions more inclusive to many more audiences. We should respect participants' accessibility needs and be open for other accessibility issues. Some people might have accessibility needs that you didn't think of. Do not assume any teaching and learning platforms, methods, or materials are already fully accessible. Accessibility arrangement is an ongoing process. Although there are fundamental domains of accessibility practices, we should always take the diversity of user needs and situational contexts into consideration. Overall, sessions and materials that are accessible to people with disabilities are also more accessible to many more audiences. It would also be relatively easier and time-saving to modify materials that are somewhat accessible than to try to convert inaccessible materials to become more accessible. Misconception 5. Accessibility practices only concern students with disabilities. The answer is no, not really. Accessibility practices does not only concern students with disabilities. All students and staff members may have diverse accessibility needs under different situations. For example, when having online classes with low bandwidth or unstable connection to the internet, or using older hardware and software, or using different electronic devices, such as laptop, tablet, or smartphone. Therefore, it would be good to provide course materials before the class and prepare for alternative means of engaging in e-learning activities or tools, to minimize the chances of interrupting the flow of class due to the internet or device responsiveness. For those attending online class in noisy environments, captions for videos would be very essential. For those viewing the course materials through monitors, in bright sunlight or glare, or a projector display, in a well-lit venue, sufficient color contrast of the content would be very essential for clear reading. Misconception 6. Accessibility is something extra. The answer is definitely not. Accessibility is fundamental to education. The provision of an accessible and inclusive teaching and learning environment, both physical and virtual, and educational materials, both physical and digital, and experiences, are important to all students, including students with disabilities. Accessibility is basic human rights entitled to people with disabilities, as protected by international conventions and domestic law. From human rights perspective, accessible education actualizes the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD. The CRPD protects basic human rights of people with disabilities and ensures efforts in eliminating barriers for all individuals on an equal moral basis. The CRPD has entered into force for the People's Republic of China, including the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, in 2008. Higher education institutions should be committed to foster an accessible and inclusive teaching and learning environment. Although all the articles are interrelated and equally important, the following 3 documents would be particularly helpful in the proper understanding of the significance of promoting inclusive practices at higher education institutions. They are the Article 9, Accessibility, the Article 24, Education, along with the General Comment Number 4 on Article 24, Right to Inclusive Education, by the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which provide further elaborations on 2 specific Articles 9 and 24. You are highly encouraged to refer to the full text for details. It helps eliminate ableism and embrace diversity. From sustainable development perspective, accessible education actualizes the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. The SDGs are blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future. The SDG 4, Quality Education, and the SDG 10, Reduced Inequalities, are highly relevant to the higher education institution's commitment to accessible and inclusive teaching and learning experience. You are highly encouraged to refer to the full text for details. From legal perspective, there is an obligation for an educational establishment to provide reasonable accommodation for students with disabilities, unless such provision imposes unjustifiable hardship. Such obligation has been recognized in the Code of Practice on Education, issued by the Equal Opportunities Commission, in accordance with the Disability Discrimination Ordinance, CAP 487 DDO, which came into operation in Hong Kong in 1996, and laid down equal opportunity in education for people with disabilities in Hong Kong. For details of the definitions of reasonable accommodation and unjustifiable hardship, you may refer to the Disability Discrimination Ordinance, CAP 487, for further information. From teaching and learning perspective, the provision of an accessible physical and digital learning environment and teaching and learning materials serve as an essential context for universal design for learning, UDL, and whole person development to occur effectively. UDL maximizes equal opportunities of students with disabilities and the effectiveness of teaching and learning to cater for the inherently diverse characteristics and needs of all learners. Moreover, educational aims of the universities emphasize students' whole person development, self-exploration, and actualization of students' own interest, potential, and pursuit. We should respect students' self-determination and decision-making. We should not limit their choices and opportunities based on their disability status. Whole person development emphasizes the progressive process of the holistic enhancement of multidimensional capacities, that is, attitude, performance, and potential of learners. It essentially requires accessible physical and digital teaching and learning environment, an UDL approach, so students can truly enjoy engaging in a wide range of academic and non-academic activities for actualizing their potential, aspiration, and whole person development. From the perspective of promoting well-being, the provision of an accessible physical and digital learning environment, and teaching and learning materials serve as an essential context of positive well-being. It could foster an accepting culture that embraces diversity, promotes self-acceptance, autonomy, and social interactions that enhance the well-being of university members with disabilities. It would minimize the potential burden, tension, and negotiation between university members with and without disabilities. It may in turn minimize acute and chronic stress triggered by inaccessibility experiences or recurrent negotiation for accessibility arrangements. Misconception 7. Accessibility practices are troublemaking. The answer is no. Accessibility practices are not troublemaking. Instead, accessibility practices could facilitate troubleshooting, help improve work efficiency, and indeed benefit teaching and learning. In fact, making information accessible is not necessarily more expensive or more complicated. However, it requires some awareness and probably a shift in your production process, and content creators getting used to it. Let's briefly go through some examples of situations. Scenario 1. If we have sent the PowerPoint slides to students before the class, even if the PowerPoint slides suddenly do not work during class, or the shared screen, or the internet disconnected during live streaming, students can continue to read the PowerPoint slides locally on their own devices, such as computers. It may minimize disturbance to the flow of class. Scenario 2. It is very common for course instructors to scan some materials originally in physical copy to create soft copy in PDF for students as reference materials. The text content in such image PDF is not searchable. It is inaccessible to assistive technologies, such as screen readers. By converting this image PDF into a searchable PDF, the text becomes searchable and editable and more accessible to assistive technologies. It also helps other students, as they can also search within the text, using search functions, like the Command Control+F, to look for specific terms and find what they need quickly, or to highlight, copy, or paste text. Documents with editable text content and proper reading order can also facilitate resizing and reflowing for reading on mobile devices with relatively smaller screen or magnified viewing. It would facilitate more effective use of course materials. Scenario 3. One of the accessibility practice, if creating teaching and learning materials, is to ensure sufficient color contrast and readability under grayscale. Some students would love to print out course materials in black and white instead of color printing. Black and white printouts or copies are much more prevalent due to the relatively high cost of colored ink. For researchers who are working on academic publications, such as journal articles, may want to avoid the use of color, except when it is necessary for understanding the material, because of the relatively high cost of color reproduction for printed materials. Scenario 4. Captions could help overcome poor audio quality or limitations of sensitive environments, such as places in which we could not play video with loud sound. Scenario 5. Properly formatted heading hierarchy helps generate different navigational aids, such as a table of contents and bookmarks, to facilitate more efficient navigation and better understanding of the documents. Instructors and students can quickly have a better idea of the content structure of a long essay to reflect and think about how to improve the logical flow of the paper. Properly formatting heading structure is also listed in the navigation pane in Microsoft Word for jumping to any particular section easily. For papers requiring specific academic styles and formatting, the formats can be set and applied to different documents. For example, in Microsoft Word, you may make use of the Styles pane to set the formats and heading structure. The table of contents, format style, and structure can be updated automatically, and it can save time updating manually and minimize errors, especially when revising dissertation and long papers. Misconception 8. Accessibility practices bring no benefit to scholarly work or professional development. The answer is definitely not. Accessibility practices could benefit scholarly work and professional development. We will briefly go through 4 examples, including knowledge exchange and community engagement, research findings dissemination, preservist training, and cultural competence. knowledge exchange and community engagement. Writing alternative texts and image descriptions for graphics could help train students to communicate field-specific and scientific knowledge in a professional and concise manner to the wider community. It may also help train students in how to report findings when writing research papers. Defining document language may support automated translation using tools like Google Translate. The specified document language is also used by the spelling and grammar checker. Captions and transcripts of videos in massive open online courses, also known as MOOC, can enhance the accessibility of the course videos to a wider community. For example, according to the help articles on Coursera official website, all Coursera course lecture videos offer closed captioning. All Coursera videos have subtitles in the primary language of the course. According to edX official website, edX requires all videos in edX courses to include timed text captions. They also published the edX Accessibility Best Practices Guidance for content providers for public reference. Research findings dissemination. More and more journals and conference submissions now include accessibility as one of the requirements for submissions and presentations. For example, the journal Disability and Society requires that tables and figures must be presented with the interests of those using screen readers in mind. According to the Accessibility Guidelines for Speakers, published by the American Psychological Association, each presentation or session should be designed and conducted with the full participation of all members and student affiliates in mind. Therefore, they request that all presenters review the guidelines and take the steps necessary to make all programming accessible to their respective audiences. Alternative and accessible formats of publications, such as PDF, ebooks, videos, and podcasts, would benefit the authors and the readers' community and business in different aspects. Many of us would love using electronic version of textbooks for teaching and learning and research. Electronic text that is responsive could be reflowed to fit different screen sizes and orientations. The contents would be recognized by assistive technologies, such as text-to-speech technologies, screen readers, or converted to Braille or large print. Readers can search for any information within the publications using shortcut keys such as Ctrl+F. Preservist training and cultural competence. It is important for students to learn about accessibility practices. It may better equip preservist professionals, such as teachers, social workers, and psychologists, for their practicum and future work. For example, it would be very useful for preservist teachers for their teaching practicum, as there might be students with disabilities in their classes and colleagues with disabilities. It would also contribute to one's cultural competence and leadership in diversity and inclusion in workplace, as accessibility practices would better cater for the diversity of individuals. Summary. In this video, we have briefly covered 8 misconceptions about disability, accessibility needs, and accessibility support in relation to teaching and learning. All students and staff members may have diverse access needs under different situations. Not all disabilities are visible. Disability does not simply refer to personal medical conditions. Students with the same types of disabilities do not necessarily require the same set of accessibility support. Always consider accessibility when designing and delivering educational materials and activities throughout the entire process from the beginning, not as afterthought. And regardless of whether any students approach you with a request for accessibility arrangements, accessibility practices does not only concern students with disabilities. Accessibility practices concern all of us. Accessible teaching and learning environment and materials are fundamental to education. It eliminates ableism and embraces diversity. Accessibility could facilitate troubleshooting and help improve work efficiency. Accessibility could benefit teaching and learning, scholarly work, and professional development. Disclaimer.
This video does not contain any business promotion elements. Software, programs, and operating systems are constantly and rapidly developing along with changing accessibility functions. Statements in this video about the functions of any software, programs, and operating systems may no longer represent the current status. The recommended practices in this video are not exhaustive or the best solutions for each situation. It is possible that the hyperlinks of the cited resources in this video might be edited or removed by the corresponding contributor after publication of this video.
You may find the list of references on screen now. You may also refer to the text version of the reference list below the video player on the webpage. Acknowledgement. This project is funded by the UGC Special Grant for Strategic Development of Virtual Teaching and Learning. The first author, Gloria Ma, would like to acknowledge the support of the postdoctoral fellowship scheme offered by the Research Grants Council of Hong Kong. This work is licensed under Attribution Non-Commercial Sharia-like 4.0 International. To cite this video, please follow the suggested citation on screen now. You may also refer to the text version of the suggested citation below the video player on the webpage. For more guidelines on creating accessible digital educational materials and virtual learning environments, please refer to our Virtual Learning Accessibility Toolkit at https://vlaccessibilitytoolkit.hku.hk or download the full text in PDF from HKU Data Repository. You may scan the QR code on screen now to visit the database. You may also download the set of cheat sheets for quick reference and sharing. You are highly encouraged to watch the other videos in this Idea Leaders Self-Learning series to enrich the knowledge of the basic concepts, practical tips, and resources of enhancing the accessibility of virtual teaching and learning. Here comes to the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Let's begin our journey towards co-creating accessible virtual teaching and learning.